Okay, we're talking about incorporation today, incorporating a C Corp specifically, and we are also talking about some startup-specific issues surrounding incorporation. We've already gone through much of the basics, so this piece is going to talk about the capitalization table, the cap table. And I want to make sure that everybody knows in startup-specific scenarios, one of two things is happening when we talk about these additions to the incorporation process. The first is they're either providing incentives or protection. Incentives meaning they provide you, the founder, or the managers with incentives to hire people and retain them, or they somehow protect you from legal liability or other potential problems. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk briefly about how the cap table relates to the incorporation process. If you want to learn more about cap tables, there are certainly specific lessons about cap tables in detail. This is really about how a cap table relates to the incorporation process. So when you go through incorporation, as we explained, at the end of it you're going to have filed your documents. Your company will be incorporated in a given state. You will divide equity amongst the various equity holders. You'll name the board of directors and officers. There are a series of things that you will do. At the end of that, you will receive a document that says what breaks down essentially the ownership percentages of the corporation. And this is folks who hold shares. So whenever you hear the term cap table or capitalization table, it's almost always called cap table. This is what people are referring to. It means how's the company capitalized? Who owns what shares inside of that corporation? Cap tables can be extremely simple, and we'll do some examples here in a second. They can be super simple, or they can be extremely complex after a long period of time and many shareholders and many rounds of funding. So for now, you're going to be creating what's going to be a very simple cap table because you're incorporating your company. And so it's very early in the company's evolution. So let's talk about some of these key points. First, the cap table will usually be an Excel document. It's nothing more complex than that. And it shows two primary things: percentage ownership and share ownership, meaning how many shares each person or shareholder owns and what percentage of the company that represents. The second piece is it shows the options pool, if that was created as part of incorporation. We talked about that in another lesson, but that's almost always something that's included in the incorporation process for startups. The options pool will be shown on the cap table, and it will literally say options pool, and we'll have a certain number of shares and that will represent a certain percentage of the company. That's important to understand because those shares can be doled out, providing an incentive for you to hire and retain employees. That's what creates your options packages that you may be handing out. So that will show up there. It also typically shows pre-incorporation and post-incorporation numbers. So you have some idea of, before we incorporated, here's what people owned, and now after we're incorporated, or here's what we agreed to, and after we're incorporated, this is how much the founder owns, this is how much another founder owns, and this is how much the options pool represents. And I'll show some quick examples of that in a second. And then also, it serves as a record of ownership. That's super important because over time, as you hand out options grants and they either vest or don't vest, or you give a consultant some options to do a project for you, or you pay one of your board of directors, you grant them options over time, or those various things can get confusing. You've got a lot of different grants out there. People are vesting at different speeds over the course of time. So this serves as the record of ownership. It really is the record of last resort to prove who owns what. So it's super important that you keep that updated, that it should reflect all outstanding legal agreements. It's actually a relatively simple mathematical exercise, but you've got to make sure that that cap table shows who's been granted what. Often this is done in conjunction with the attorney, but once you get a handle for how cap tables work, it's not a very difficult exercise to update it yourself. And in fact, sometimes you can find very good cap table models on the internet. But that's essentially what this does. So really quickly, let's talk about what a cap table typically might look like, and then we'll talk about a bad outcome or a good outcome associated with you keeping track of your cap table. So we mentioned that there would be founder number 1 in this company, founder number 2 in our example company, and the options pool. Okay, so in this case, we created, for the sake of argument, 10 million shares in this corporation during your incorporation. That's one of the things that happens during your incorporation, is you choose how many shares and what value those shares represent. So let's say we have created 10 million shares. The options pool, on the advice of your attorney, you made your options pool 10% of your company. So the options pool would represent 1 million shares. This is 10%. Founder number 2 and founder number 1 have split the rest of the shares, so you have 4.5 million shares. They've evenly split the rest of the company. So the founders each own 45% of the company. Okay? This is after incorporation. This is 100% of the company. After incorporation, that's how your 10 million shares is split up. Pretty much that's all the cap table would show at this point in time. It's a very simple Excel file that is laid out in a way that shows you, the total. So your shares outstanding here would be 10 million. And you can figure out what percentage this represents simply by doing division, although the cap table will often show those percentages. So maybe pre-funding, it was split up 50-50 between the founders. This is what it looks like post-funding. So remember, these options you're going to hand out little by little to employees, and that will eventually show up on your your cap table. So let's say I work as a consultant for you, and you decide to give me 50,000 shares. My shares show up here, and this reduces to 950,000. And you have a slightly smaller percentage available, and I have this, whatever percentage that is, I can't do the math. So that's essentially about as basic as we can get with a cap table. That's how cap tables work. Always keep them up to date. That's it.
Good outcome, bad outcome.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. We're going to talk about bad outcomes. So let's say that I do not keep track of the fact that I gave Matt 50,000 shares to do some work for me. And worse yet, I made him a verbal offer or an email offer that I didn't remember to give another 50,000 shares if he finished the product. Now, years later, and many rounds of funding later, I go to do an IPO. And the law firm that's organizing these shares for the IPO digs up, hey, who's this guy, Matt? He either shows up on the law firm's door when he hears they're about to IPO and says, hey, I have this agreement that says that you gave me 50,000 shares. The lawyers say, this wasn't on the cap table. We don't know about this. We have no record of this. And I'm saying, well, here's my signed document that's got the founder's signature on it and my signature on it. And you owe me 50,000 shares. And then I say, oh, and by the way, I have this other email that he said he was going to give me another 50,000 and he didn't. And none of that was recorded on the cap table. All of a sudden, I become an impediment to either you selling your company or you doing a public offering because you didn't keep track of that stuff. And that's a very simple example of a dispute that could potentially happen. So you can avoid that by always keeping this updated, keeping a master version, and communicating that with your attorney.